So, hello and welcome to my presentation today on professional competence, ethical standards, and business skills quality assurance. Uh, as you might remember, although I kind of assume you won't, I'm actually based mostly in Switzerland, and most of my work goes, well, to Switzerland, Germany, Austria, and then a few other places, but mostly the German speaking countries in Europe. So this means that the British standards don't directly apply. However, the common European one is this ISO 17100 2015 requirements for translation services. So this is the one that applies to most of Europe, and any of the agencies that I work with would be working with this one. Obviously, we've also got the UK one, the National Occupational Standards, the 2007. I think basically looking into these two, they do mirror each other quite a lot. So I'm going to talk a little bit about them in a minute. And I think the other main practical code of conduct, if you like, that people receive as a translator, particularly as a freelance translator, are the non-disclosure agreements. Now, I think most people will come across these either from agencies or with companies directly. They're very basic idea, i.e., you can't disclose any of the information in the translation to anyone else. And I've seen ones for banks that go as far as you're not allowed to work in any open space. You have to work in a closed space, etc. So these non-disclosed agreements are actually quite interesting. I think in practical senses, it just means you're not allowed to share around your work. If we look now at the British standards of 2007, I think this is the summary that is most important for the average person. And there's a lot of blah blah. In my personal opinion, there's a lot of blah blah in this document. But I think this basically summarizes the situation. And I also would say that I think most of this is pretty common sense. I mean, meet the standard of performance as described, treat all information you receive as confidential, be impartial, don't accept anything you're not allowed to. I mean, these things, in my opinion, are fairly common sense, but maybe some of them are of importance to people. I mean, do not accept an assignment which is beyond your competence. Um, we might be tempted, I mean, basically for financial means or to please customers to take things that we don't quite feel comfortable doing, and maybe this should be questioned. Um, and I think, some of these things are fairly basic. I mean, do not bring the profession into disrepute. I presume that's not recommended in any profession. So if we look a little bit at that ISO 17100, which actually comes from Switzerland as the International Organization for Standardization is based in Geneva. Again, I think they mirror each other a lot. And basically, the essence of it is translation is not just one phase of the process. You can't, or if you want to be approved, you can't just translate it and then have it printed. There has to be an element of review. So quality is guaranteed by review, and review comes in slightly different forms. So you have the translator who translates it the first time, but then you also have the reviewers, revisers, and proofreaders. As a minor note, I was to start with a little bit confused about what the difference was between any of these three, apart from translators. But as I understand it correctly, revising is actually what we kind of think proofreading is, in that you have to be competent in both languages. So you have to fully understand the source text and the target text in order to be able to revise, whereas a proofreader will just review the text in one language. So if I do my translation from French to English and then get an English speaker who can't really speak French to check over the English version, well, that would just be proofreading. This difference is probably of minimal importance in day-to-day life, as basically the text needs to be revised and proofread. So I don't think there's a huge difference to be made. I think just proofreading is a fairly rare occurrence. So moving on to real life, as I sort of mentioned before, I'm not a huge fan of pages and pages and pages of documents, which can be summarized in very short paragraphs. And I also think, but the main question for all of us is, these standards, these codes of conduct, do they apply really? And who checks, or how do they check? And I think looking at either of the two, one element is that you need some form of translation qualification or experience. Now, you're dealing with different types of customers. If you're dealing with an agency, particularly one which is certified, they tend to check before you start working with them what qualifications and what experience you have. I've noticed that some of the German-speaking ones are particularly sort of strict on you sending them paperwork about what you've done, etc. But that's about as far as it goes. And the other main thing is that all these agencies, they will always have a translation reviewed. There's always a proofreading, reviewing stage to the task, and that is required by these standards. I think the rest, personally, I think the rest of the standards about personal development, about everything else, it's, for me personally, a lot of blah blah that's fairly common sense. And I think on a day-to-day basis, an agency will check once if you know what you're doing, give you some practice translations, and then that's it. In terms of personal development, I mean, there are obviously, you can specialize in different things, and that is a thing that people can look into. But I think on a day-to-day basis, in my experience, or talking to other freelance translators, an agency will give you a job, and as long as you do the job well, they'll keep coming back to you. So, assuming you have a job, there's the element of quality assurance. Now, as I said before, quality assurance is done through proofreading, and reviewing, which is part of the standards. But another part of it is feedback. I think feedback in the industry is quite important, particularly if you're a freelance translator, as if you're taking individual jobs from different places and you're working on a website such as PROZ or PROZ, or however you're actually meant to pronounce it, if anybody knows. This is quite important. I mean, it's the equivalent of having a hotel, being on Booking.com, and the reviews people leave for you. So there are reviews you can leave on the website, which will be the client reviewing your work, but it's fairly basic. It's basically what you see most of the time, unless they've decided to add a comment, is will they work again with you or not? And you also have the other way around, which could be interesting for people who don't know about it, is you can review agencies or clients. So you can, for instance, say this agency took ages to pay me. I mean, you're taking a risk if you start playing this game, because will the agency give you any more work if you start complaining about them, etc. And there are also stories of sort of legal problems if you criticize agencies too much without full justification, etc. But there is this opportunity of feedback, which is both good and bad. Presumably, it's pretty good as long as you are good. But it is something to look out for. I mean, there are other types of feedback, more direct, depending on the agencies or the clients you'll work with. They'll give you feedback, very detailed feedback. I mean, almost like on this Translation Masters, where you'll have your text sent back to you with various comments. You could have a more general one, or you can have absolutely nothing at all, and you'll never hear again from the company. This can also happen. In terms of quality assurance, before sending out the product or at the second stage, there's also software which we can rely on. I mean, you have the opportunity in Trados to export bilingual review files, so you can send both versions out, and people can review these, put them back in Trados, and send it back. This kind of stuff is useful, and there's obviously the very basic, well, it's not basic at all, but well known Word spell checkers or other spell checkers. There are slightly more advanced ones out there. These are obviously essential. I mean, we can't be sending out things with mistakes or basic mistakes in them. So, in terms of quality assurance, on one side, we've got the proofreading. In the German-speaking world, they like to refer to this as the Vier-Augen-Prinzip, 4 eyes, so 2 people looking at every text, and that's, I think, the most important part of any of the standards we could look at. We've got the feedback, we've got the software, and we've got the possibility of this language quality inspection, which isn't something I've really come across, and I can't find anyone who has. But basically, a sort of, as far as I understand it, it's a sort of marking system for translations, points awarding system, which apparently is in existence. But unfortunately, I couldn't find so much information about how this is actually used. Now, quality comes with a price, and as a freelance translator, you have to factor in costs such as proofreading. Are you going to be offering the proofreading yourself? I don't mean doing it yourself, but the fact that the translation you provide, has it already been proofread or not? Obviously, if you're going to offer this, well, your price is going to be considerably more expensive because you have to pay the proofreader. Or are you offering just a basic translation? Agencies normally, obviously, because of these standards, will pay you just to do the translation or just to do the proofreading. So you're not going to send the text off to someone else, especially if you've got non-disclosure agreements, etc. Obviously, if you're working completely independently for a direct customer, that's where the question comes in more. Are you proofreading them, or are you providing the proofreading included or not? I think a lot of direct customers would expect you to, because obviously they just want to use the product, and what's behind the product is not so important for them. However, you have to factor in the cost, and this cost will obviously, we're not quite doubling the cost, but we're getting towards double the cost, and these might need to be explained to the customer. I think another point of quality assurance is we can't always be perfect, so there can be difficulties. I think this is quite important to know how to deal with difficulties with clients. The basic one is not happy with the translation. Now, you can do a translation, send it off to whatever type of client, and they can reply with, "We're not happy." Now, there are different ways of dealing with this. I think obviously you're going to try and placate the customer. You can, first of all, hold off with any invoicing until the problem's solved. Offer a discount if you notice that really there is a problem. But I think generally we have to be quite sure of ourselves. Obviously, we can have a quick look through to see if something didn't go majorly wrong. We have to be quite confident and say, well, no, unless it's a minor detail, if you want me to review this, it's going to cost you something or other. I've noticed that these problems often arise through proofreading, which is quite logical. Someone's read your translation and said, nope, this is not wrong. However, in the German-speaking world, very, very, very often, and I was so shocked the first few times, the proofreader is a German speaker. It's not an English speaker. So there's a German proofreading your English version of a German text. And this is a German thinking they know perfect English. And you can have pages and pages and pages of corrections or things highlighted, which are quite simply completely wrong. And I did learn this quite early on, that you basically have to say no, or please can you justify these, or a very simple, nicely worded, could you just tell me who is proofreading this, because that's sort of information that's rarely given. But basically, I mean, it's all about keeping the customer happy. So it's going to be a case by case kind of scenario. How much do you want to defend yourself? How much do you want to give in slightly in order to keep the customer? Bearing in mind, do you always want the difficult customers, etc. There was the matter of if IT, what would happen if there was a total failure, etc. I think this comes in slightly more with dealing with difficulties. You have to be honest. You have to tell the customer. I mean, a total IT failure, I think today is pretty unlikely because documents are saved somewhere else. I think quite a lot of people have two computers, a second one lying around somewhere. It's basically going to end in everything's on the internet, one way or another. So I think it's just going to be a question of a delay. You have to inform the client and offer a discount or see if you can have an extension, etc. Yeah, it really just depends on the situation. I'm not entirely sure that IT is directly part of the quality assurance. I'm meant to be a translator. I'm not an IT expert, and I think in any profession, IT is would be a separate department, and I don't think it's any different for us. However, obviously if we're freelance, well, this does make a bit of a difference because we're responsible for the product we deliver. So just to end, I think it's always for me personally always a bit of a problem with this online course. Know exactly what we're meant to be doing. I hope I'm on target again. I felt slightly less sure than the first time, and the first time I wasn't feeling particularly sure that I was on target. I'm not quite sure how much in depth we're meant to be going with these, with these standards, etc. But I hope it was of use to you and to myself. So thank you for listening. Bye bye.